Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever wondered why our world is so divided between rich and poor nations? For centuries, that gap has been growing wider and wider. So let's dive into this central mystery. Why? What are the deep forces that created this massive economic divergence across the globe? And, to really get a feel for this kind of wealth concentration, you can see it happening right now. Based on Thomas Piketty's research, the top 10% slice of the national income pie in the U.S. has swelled to nearly half. But this isn't just a modern trend. It's a pattern that echoes a much bigger, much older global story. And it really forces us to ask, what are the deep historical roots of this?
All right, to get to the bottom of this, we have to start by investigating some of the most common explanations. You could call them the usual suspects.
Now, a really popular theory is geography. The idea that Europe just had better natural resources. But the work of historian Kenneth Pomeranz kind of throws a wrench in that whole idea. He discovered that right before the Industrial Revolution, key regions in Europe and China were surprisingly similar ecologically. In fact, places like Britain were actually struggling with resources, while some parts of China were, believe it or not, better off when it came to fuel. So, geography alone just isn't the silver bullet answer we're looking for.
Okay, so what about colonialism? It was undeniably a massive, world-shaping force. But does it explain everything about long-term wealth? Well, here's where it gets complicated. As Gertrude Doss points out, former colonial powers like Britain and France actually saw shocking levels of prosperity after they lost their colonies. This suggests that while exploitation was absolutely part of the picture, there has to be a more durable, more complex engine of wealth at work. The usual suspects, they just don't tell the whole story.
So this is the crucial point. We have to look deeper. And according to economists Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, the answer isn't on the map. It's in the rulebook. It's all about a nation's institutions. Their core idea really boils down to two different kinds of societies. On one side, you have extractive institutions. These are basically set up by a small elite to suck wealth from everyone else. Power's concentrated at the top, and your property, your business, it's never truly safe. But on the other side, you've got inclusive institutions. These are designed to spread power and economic opportunity around, creating a level playing field where people are free to innovate and invest, because they trust that the rules are fair for everyone. And this isn't just theory, okay? It plays out again and again in history. Just take the Kuba Kingdom in Africa. Before 1620, you had two peoples, the Bashang and the Lile, who were pretty much identical. But then a leader named Sham created the Kuba Kingdom, and he introduced some truly revolutionary ideas: a central government, fair laws, courts, and even checks on his own power. And the results? It was incredible. The Kuba became way more prosperous and technologically advanced than their neighbors. It's a perfect little snapshot of how inclusive institutions can literally build wealth from the ground up.
So that little kingdom shows the principle in action. But how does this scale up? How does this idea create a global economic superpower? To really see that, we have to turn to one of the most famous turning points in all of history.
And this leads to the huge question, right? How does a country actually make that leap? How do you get off that extractive path and onto an inclusive one? Well, the story of England's Glorious Revolution gives us a really powerful answer. Now, this kind of change didn't happen overnight, not at all. It was the climax of a whole century of conflict. It began with Parliament pushing back against the king's total control over the economy. It exploded into a bloody civil war, and it finally culminated in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. That event was the tipping point. It permanently shifted power away from a single monarch and into the hands of Parliament. And the shift was just profound. Look at the difference. Before 1688, you had a king with near absolute power, your property wasn't safe, and the economy was choked by monopolies handed out to royal favorites. After 1688, Parliament is in charge, property is protected by law, and markets are thrown open to competition and new ideas. This completely rewired the country's economic DNA, and it's what laid the essential groundwork for the Industrial Revolution. But, and this is a really big but, this story comes with a major warning. Progress is not a one-way street. Just look at the Republic of Venice. It was once a shining example of inclusive, open commerce. But over time, its elites got greedy. They shut down economic opportunities for everyone else, creating extractive monopolies for themselves. And that move led directly to Venice's long, slow decline, strangling the very prosperity that had made it great. So, what does all this history mean for us, right here, right now? Well, this framework is incredibly useful because, as we're about to see, that fundamental tension between inclusive and extractive forces is very much alive today. Let's start with our financial system. The documentary The System of Money makes the case that it's developed some deeply extractive features. Here's the core of it. The vast majority of new money in the economy, we're talking like 97% of it, isn't created by the government. It's actually created out of thin air by private banks as interest-bearing debt every time they approve a loan. And that immediately raises a massive question. Who's really in control of our money supply, and in whose interests are they acting? To put a number on this, just get a load of this figure. 1.2 trillion pounds. That's how much new money UK commercial banks created in just the 10 years before the 2008 financial crash. And that huge flood of cash was poured into things that benefited the banking sector, like real estate and financial markets, instead of being invested in broader, more productive parts of the economy that benefit everyone. And these aren't just abstract numbers. You can see the real-world consequences of these patterns. Work by authors like Roger Burbach highlights spiraling inequality. You see social safety nets being chipped away. And for most people in places like the UK, living standards have actually been going backwards. It's a pretty clear picture of how wealth can be siphoned from the many to the few. Part of the problem here, as Matthew Klein and Michael Pettis argue, is that our thinking is stuck in the past. We're often using these old, outdated economic ideas from the 18th century to try and understand a completely transformed global economy. It's like trying to fix a smartphone with a hammer and chisel. And it means we often can't even see these new, more sophisticated forms of extraction clearly. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that history is not destiny. These institutions, both good and bad, are built by people, and that means they can be changed by people. The exact same struggle, that tug of war between inclusion and extraction that created the Great Divergence centuries ago, is playing out all around us right now. And it leaves us with a really vital question to ask ourselves. Are we working to make our systems more inclusive for everyone, or are we just getting better at building new, more sophisticated ways to extract wealth?